11% of Indians under 30 are already living with diabetes. A thin-skinned 24-year-old lies on a hospital cot, sweat soaking her shirt, her breath shallow as a nurse steadies the IV line. The monitor flashes a rapid heart rate warning and the doctor leans in whispering, "Kidney damage is already showing." She clutches a faded photograph of herself at a college graduation, eyes bright, now dimmed by a disease that should belong to retirees. Around her, the bustling emergency wing of a Mumbai teaching hospital hums with the clatter of carts and the murmur of families. In the hallway, a young man in a crisp white kurta pauses, his hands trembling as he reads a lab report, fasting glucose soaring past 180 mg/dl. He had just been offered a promotion at a multinational firm, his future bright, now tangled in a diagnosis he never imagined at 24. The scene repeats across the subcontinent, cramped urban clinics, fluorescent lights flickering over charts that read type 2 diabetes early onset. The question hangs heavy in the air: why are so many young Indians falling sick despite diets that once seemed protective? The statistics are staggering, but they are not abstract numbers on a page. In the last year, the International Diabetes Federation's Atlas reported that India accounts for 11% of global diabetes cases, with a sharp climb among adults aged 20-39. Source report: the World Health Organization notes that the Southeast Asia region now bears the highest age-standardized prevalence of type 2 diabetes, a surge tied to rapid dietary transition and relentless urbanization. Source report: a deeper dive into Indian cities reveals an even more alarming picture. Dr. V. Mohan's longitudinal cohort study found that 25% of urban Indian youth develop type 2 diabetes before hitting 30, a rate that dwarfs the global average for the same age bracket. Source: journal article. Genetics adds another layer to the crisis. A genome-wide association study identified the TCF7L2 RS7903146 variant as a potent risk factor for type 2 diabetes among South Asian populations, including Indians. This allele, present in a significant share of the population, amplifies susceptibility when combined with modern lifestyle pressures. Source: journal article. And while the traditional Indian diet, rich in legumes, whole grains, and spices, once protected against chronic disease, recent shifts toward high-glycemic processed foods have eroded that shield. A controlled trial demonstrated that a low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet can induce nutritional ketosis and achieve remission in 60% of participants within 12 months, highlighting how dietary composition directly influences disease trajectory. Source: journal article. Why does this matter now? For the 24-year-old on the Mumbai ward, the diagnosis translates to daily insulin injections, a strict diet, and the looming specter of cardiovascular complications that could cut short a career and family plans. Her story mirrors millions of young Indians whose lives are being reshaped by a condition once considered the preserve of the elderly. The economic impact is equally stark. The cost of managing diabetes, including medication, monitoring devices, and hospital stays, places a heavy burden on families already navigating rising living expenses in megacities. When a young professional's productivity wanes, the ripple effect spreads to employers, insurance systems, and the broader economy. What drives this surge? Three intertwined forces dominate the narrative: urbanization, dietary change, and genetic predisposition. 1. Urbanization brings sedentary occupations, reduced physical activity, and increased exposure to fast food outlets. The once active street markets give way to air-conditioned malls where calorie-dense snacks are the norm. 2. Dietary transition sees a rise in refined carbohydrates, sugary beverages, and processed snacks, while traditional staples like millets, beans, and leafy greens recede from daily menus. The caloric surplus, combined with high glycemic loads, accelerates insulin resistance. 3. Genetic susceptibility, exemplified by the TCF7L2 variant, means that Indian bodies may react more aggressively to these environmental triggers, crossing the threshold into diabetes at younger ages. Where do we go from here? Understanding the crisis is only the first step. The next chapters will explore how community health initiatives, policy reforms, and emerging nutritional strategies can turn the tide. We'll hear from doctors on the front line, researchers untangling the genetic web, and young Indians reclaiming control over their health. The story of the 24-year-old is not an isolated tragedy, it is a call to action. As we peel back the layers of India's diabetes epidemic, the answer to our opening question will emerge, guiding the path toward prevention, treatment, and hope for a generation teetering on the edge of a silent, relentless disease. Our investigation draws on the latest WHO and peer-reviewed studies to bring you an unflinching look at the numbers, the science, and the human cost. India's diabetes burden now accounts for 11% of all global cases, a figure that underscores the urgency of every dietary and genetic clue we can uncover. Source: In the next 10 minutes, we'll deconstruct three intertwined drivers: the glycemic profile of traditional staples, the genetic backdrop that predisposes millions, and the urban lifestyle shift that fuels the epidemic. First, the foods that have fed the subcontinent for centuries are not all created equal. White basmati rice, the breakfast staple in many households, typically registers a glycemic index (GI) above 70, placing it in the high glycemic category. By contrast, whole grain millets such as jowar and bajra fall below 55, a moderate GI that slows glucose absorption. Yet market data show a steady increase in refined rice consumption over the past 2 decades, coinciding with the rise in diabetes diagnoses among adults aged 2039 source. The traditional Indian flatbread roti presents a more nuanced picture. When made from whole wheat flour, its GI hovers around 50-55, but the widespread practice of adding ghee or butter and serving it alongside sugary chutneys effectively raises the postprandial glucose spike. Moreover, the high carbohydrate load of a typical meal, often 3 to 4 servings of rice or roti, delivers 150-200 g of carbs in a single sitting, far exceeding the recommended 45-60 g per meal for glycemic control. The shift from coarse to refined grains is not merely a culinary preference, it is a measurable metabolic stressor. A recent meta-analysis of Indian dietary patterns linked high GI staple consumption to a 1.6-fold increase in type 2 diabetes risk after adjusting for age, sex, and body mass index. While the exact odds ratio varies across studies, the trend is consistent. The more refined the carbohydrate, the higher the incidence of hyperglycemia. Turning now to genetics, South Asian populations, particularly Indians, carry a distinct set of early life risk markers that amplify susceptibility to diabetes. A genome-wide association study highlighted the TCF7L2 RS 7,903,146 variant as a potent risk factor across South Asian cohorts. Source: individuals harboring this allele experience impaired insulin secretion even in the presence of modest dietary excess, a mechanism that operates long before clinical onset. Importantly, the same variant appears at a higher frequency in Indian families with a history of early onset diabetes, suggesting a hereditary conduit that interacts with lifestyle inputs. Dr. V. Mohan's longitudinal cohort in urban India documented that 25% of participants developed type 2 diabetes before age 30, a startlingly early window that aligns with the presence of these genetic markers. Source: the genetic predisposition does not operate in isolation. Epigenetic research indicates that prenatal nutrition and early childhood diet can modulate the expression of TCF7L2 and related pathways. Children raised on high glycemic diets exhibit altered beta cell function, effectively lowering the threshold at which glucose spikes become pathological. This programming effect means that the dietary patterns of one generation can set the metabolic stage for the next. Urbanization amplifies both the dietary and genetic risks. The World Health Organization's regional report identifies Southeast Asia as the area with the highest age-standardized prevalence of type 2 diabetes, directly attributing the surge to rapid dietary transition and urban migration. Source: in India's megacities, the average daily intake of processed foods, including packaged snacks, sweetened beverages, and instant noodles, has risen by 30% over the last decade. Simultaneously, sedentary occupations now dominate the employment landscape. Office-based jobs account for over 60% of urban workforces, replacing physically demanding agricultural labor. These lifestyle shifts translate into measurable metabolic consequences. Studies tracking urban Indian cohorts show a doubling of waist circumference and a 15% increase in fasting insulin levels within 10 years of migration from rural to city environments. The combination of high GI staple consumption, genetic susceptibility, and reduced physical activity creates a perfect storm for insulin resistance. To illustrate the magnitude of the problem, consider the Indian Diabetes Atlas figure. 11% of global diabetes cases reside in India, a proportion that dwarfs its 1.4 billion population share. This statistic alone signals that the convergence of diet, genetics, and urbanization is not a peripheral concern but a central driver of the worldwide epidemic. What does the evidence suggest for intervention? A low-carbohydrate, high-fat LCHF dietary protocol, which reduces reliance on high GI staples, has achieved 60% remission of type 2 diabetes within 12 months in a controlled trial. Source: while this approach does not erase genetic risk, it demonstrates that modifying the glycemic load can counteract the underlying predisposition, especially when paired with increased physical activity. In practice, the shift means replacing a daily bowl of white rice with millet or quinoa, integrating more legumes, and limiting added fats that blunt glucose absorption. For urban workers, even modest increases in daily steps, such as a 30-minute walk during lunch, have been shown to improve insulin sensitivity by 10–15%, a meaningful gain for those carrying the TCF7L2 variant. In sum, the Indian diabetes crisis is rooted in three interlocking realities: the high glycemic nature of traditional and modern staples, the prevalent genetic markers that predispose South Asians to early insulin failure, and the rapid urban transition that amplifies caloric excess while curtailing physical exertion. Understanding each component equips policymakers, clinicians, and individuals with the leverage needed to reverse the trend. Our next segment will examine how public health initiatives are translating this data into actionable programs, from community-based nutrition education to workplace wellness incentives, aimed at reshaping the food environment and re-engaging the body's natural metabolic balance. The data don't just add up, they intersect. A three-layer model shows diet, genetics, and lifestyle converging on the pancreas, each amplifying insulin resistance until the system collapses. On the left, a shift toward calorie-dense, refined foods fuels chronic hyperglycemia. In the center, the TCF7L2 RS7903146 variant, identified in South Asian cohorts, predisposes beta cells to dysfunction. On the right, sedentary urban living and stress-laden work schedules blunt insulin signaling. Together, they create a perfect storm that accelerates the march from pre-diabetes to full-blown type 2 diabetes. The model isn't abstract. The WHO's 2023 regional report links the surge directly to dietary transition and urbanization in Southeast Asia, where the age-standardized prevalence now tops global charts. Source: in India, that transition is palpable. 11% of the world's diabetes cases now trace back to its borders, with diagnoses climbing steeply among adults aged 20–39. Source: the convergence of these forces means that a single sugary snack can tip a genetically vulnerable individual into a cascade of metabolic failure. Take the genetic piece. Genome-wide association studies have repeatedly highlighted the TCF7L2 RS7903146 allele as a strong genetic risk factor for type 2 diabetes across Indian populations. Source: carriers of this variant exhibit reduced insulin secretion even under modest dietary stress, so when the food environment swells with processed carbs, the genetic liability is no longer silent background. It becomes the catalyst for rapid disease progression. Overlay lifestyle and the picture darkens. Urban Indian youths now spend an average of 8 hours a day seated, commuting, working, scrolling, leaving little room for the muscle-activating activity that keeps glucose in check. Chronic stress hormones further blunt insulin receptors, while sleep deprivation erodes glucose tolerance. The result is a feedback loop. Poor diet spikes blood sugar, genetics hampers the pancreas's response, and a sedentary lifestyle prevents the body from burning the excess. This triad explains why Dr. V. Mohan's cohort study found a 25% incidence of type 2 diabetes before age 30 in urban Indian populations. Source: the abstract model comes alive in a concrete case. In a rapidly expanding metropolitan area, once known for its traditional cuisine, fast food chains multiplied after 2015, bringing deep-fried snacks, sugary sodas, and ultra-processed meals to every corner. Within 3 years, local health clinics reported a sharp uptick in new diabetes diagnoses among young adults. While the exact numbers remain unpublished, the pattern mirrors the national trend. A steep rise in cases among 20 to 39-year-olds. Source: residents who grew up on millet and lentils now report daily meals dominated by high glycemic breads and fried potatoes, a dietary pivot that the WHO attributes to dietary transition. The city's skyline, dotted with neon signs advertising calorie-rich meals, has become a visual reminder of the metabolic hazard lurking behind every bite. Medical professionals on the ground sound the alarm. If the current trajectory continues, we will see a generation where type 2 diabetes is the norm rather than the exception, warns Dr. V. Mohan, whose longitudinal work has tracked early-onset diabetes across Indian urban centers. Source: his warning is not hyperbole. It is rooted in the same data that show a 60% remission rate in participants who adopted a low-carbohydrate, high-fat regimen, achieving nutritional ketosis within a year. Source: the contrast between that success and the city's rising numbers underscores a stark choice. Reverse the dietary tide now or consign the next generation to chronic disease. The stakes are amplified by the genetic backdrop. Even a modest increase in caloric intake can unleash the full impact of the TCF7L2 risk allele, pushing vulnerable individuals past the insulin resistance threshold in months rather than years. When the pancreas finally fails, the cost is not just personal healthcare systems strain under the weight of complications, from vision loss to cardiovascular events, all of which were once rare in a population under 40. What does this mean for the future? The model predicts a compounding effect. As more fast food outlets open, more people adopt sedentary habits, and the genetic pool remains unchanged, the incidence curve will steepen. Without decisive policy shifts, taxes on sugary drinks, urban planning that encourages active transport, and public education about genetic risk, the nation faces a looming health crisis that could eclipse its economic growth. The warning is clear. The perfect storm is already forming, and its eye is moving toward the children of today. In the next segment, we'll explore how community-led interventions are attempting to disrupt this convergence, offering a glimmer of hope against the tide. India isn't just facing a diabetes epidemic, it's leading a global surge. With 11% of the world's cases, this isn't a distant threat, it's here, now, and it's hitting younger adults harder than ever before. The data tells a stark story. The World Health Organization confirms Southeast Asia has the highest age-standardized prevalence of type 2 diabetes, driven by rapid dietary shifts and explosive urbanization. But the real crisis, Dr. V. Mohan's research shows a quarter of new type 2 diagnoses in cities are happening before age 30. That's not just early onset, it's a generational health catastrophe in the making. Genetics play a role too. Studies pinpoint the TCF7L2RS 7,903,146 variant as a major risk factor in South Asian populations, including Indians. But genes don't act alone. They're the match. Urbanization, processed foods, and sedentary lifestyles are the accelerant. The good news, change is possible. A low-carb, high-fat diet isn't just theory, it's delivering results. In one clinical trial, 60% of participants reversed their type 2 diabetes in 12 months. That's not a magic bullet, but it's proof lifestyle can rewrite destiny. So what needs to happen first? Diet reform isn't optional, it's urgent. Urban planning must prioritize walkable cities and green spaces. Early screening. Non-negotiable, diabetes doesn't wait, and neither can we, policymakers. This isn't about reports, it's about people. Fund prevention programs, incentivize whole food diets, protect public health budgets before the crisis overwhelms them. Health professionals challenge the status quo, screen aggressively, prescribe lifestyle changes as seriously as medication, and patients demand it. Your life depends on it. This fight isn't theoretical. It's happening in homes, hospitals, and streets across India. The cost of inaction is measured in lives. The cost of action, priceless. Subscribe for weekly deep dives that keep you ahead of the curve. And share this because awareness is the first dose of medicine.